about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have Mas Pasagas. He is a founder, advisor, investor, and of course, an author too, and the author of the book Selling Your Business with Confidence. No other than Mr. David Mccombie.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be on the
Welcome
show.
Welcome to Bukonoa, Mr. David. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure. So I'm calling from Miami, Florida, where I'm based. And essentially, I help middle market business owners sell their business for the best possible price, fit, and terms. And we really focus on our mission, which is how would we advise our own family's business?
Mr. David McCombie, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world through your book and, of course, your expertise. The title emphasizes confidence. What are the biggest fears or sources of lack of confidence you see in mind market owners facing a sale, or how does your book specifically address them?
Sure. So the way I like to describe it is, before you have a baby, you go through birthing class, and it doesn't make the birth any easier, but at least you know what's going to happen. You're not scared to death. You know that, at this step, you're going to experience pain for around this amount of time, and you can prepare yourself accordingly. Similarly, the same thing occurs with the sale of your business. If you're not mentally prepared for it, it can be an incredibly anxiety filled time, but if you at least understand what's going to happen, who are the players, why are things occurring, you're going to have a significantly lower level of stress and anxiety. And so, when you think about what are the elements to having a confident sale, it's really about being informed about what are your options, being informed that you're making the right decision, and having a preview about what's going to happen to you ahead of time. And it's not just about external events, right? You're negotiating vis-a-vis another party, but it's also about managing yourself, because like most high performing individuals, often our greatest enemy is within. So really managing your emotions and your mindset are a critical component of the sales process.
Mr. David, why is it a mid market segment unique when it comes to selling a business, and why did it deserve its own dedicated playbook?
It's a great question. The mid market is really a space that, it's not a mom and pop coffee shop down at the corner, and it's also not a Fortune 500 company. Large companies have sophisticated advisors and teams, and, really don't need a book geared towards them. But these companies in the middle, really, there wasn't a great source of resources that they could turn to. What I found before I wrote the book was that, there were a number of books that existed for technical experts generally working in the field, and there were some books that were essentially really, really basic and watered down for business owners. And I felt like there was an opportunity to write a book that was simple but not simplistic, that really allowed business owners to understand the range of options, their pros and cons, and allow them to understand what was going to happen to them in a decent amount of detail.
You call it a playbook. What's very first play? When should an owner ideally start preparing their business for sale, or long before they even think about listing it?
That's a great question, Daniel. The reality is that just like with a house, before you sell it, you typically are going to spend time, you know, uh, organizing it, maybe spending some money painting the front door, doing some basic landscaping. And the same thing should occur before selling your business. The reality is that a well prepared business can, command, a purchase price, which could be more than double than one that's not organized. The one kind of no regrets move that every business owner should really do is making sure that their accounting is in order. It's amazing to me how many business owners come to us, and we find that there's material discrepancies in their accounting, which makes it very difficult for them to sell, or definitely for them to sell at the best possible price, for their company.
Very well said, Mr. David. Beautifully articulated. And beyond just getting a number, how does your book help owners truly understand what drives the value evaluation for their specific mid-market business and what they can realistically influence?
Yeah, it's a great question. The reality is we intentionally don't go into specific detail around how to value your specific business because you could write whole books about that. What we do talk about are the major drivers of why some businesses command a higher, what's called valuation multiple relative to others. Just for your reference, most of the time businesses are valued based upon the amount of profitability that they generate. And so then people apply a multiple against it. So if you have $1 million of profit and a four multiple, you would sell for $4 million. Um, but there are essentially three drivers of what makes a multiple higher or lower. The first is really growth. So a company that's growing fast can command a higher purchase price than one that's not, because essentially it can grow into justifying a higher purchase price. The second element is really around risk. So the less risk that a business has, or the less uncertainty that it provides, the more confidence that a buyer can come to the table and offer a high purchase price. And there's a lot of different sources of risk that the book really talks about. And then lastly is really supply and demand. Um, just like anything in life, if there are a lot of interested buyers and very few similar businesses on the market, then you're going to command a much higher price than if there's a lot of similar businesses on the market, but not a lot of interest. And so there's a lot of different factors that drive supply and demand, but one that the book really emphasizes is size. So it turns out that there's a very strong correlation between large companies and high valuations. And it's actually what propels most private equity strategies, at least here in the United States, where they try to take advantage of this phenomenon and say, well, let me aggregate or consolidate lots of small things together and try to sell it as one big thing so that I can basically earn the spread between the higher valuation big thing and the lower valuation smaller companies.
Mr. David, how critical is building a strong advisory team for a mid market sale? And what pitfalls do owners face if they try to gut it alone or with an incomplete team?
It's a great question. I think what's most important for people to realize is every time you sell a mid-market business, you're selling to a professional buyer who does this repeatedly and professionally. Versus for yourself, this is probably the first and only time you're going to sell a business. And for most middle market business owners, it represents 80 to 90% of their net worth. So it really is critical that they get it right. There are fundamentally three key team members when selling your business. The first is an M&A advisor or investment banker who essentially is going to help find you the right buyers and help you negotiate the best price, fit, and terms. Then you're also going to generally have an attorney who I would highly recommend is focusing on corporate law and specifically mergers and acquisitions. Um, and then lastly, you typically have an accountant who's going to be helping you with making sure that the transaction is tax efficient from a business standpoint. The reason why it's so important to surround yourself with a strong team is because when you're confronting such a sophisticated counterparty, if you do it yourself, you typically are going to have much worse results. Most of the time, you'll find a lot of business owners say, well, I can save money, I don't have to pay the fees. But there's numerous studies that essentially indicate and all independently come to the same conclusion, which is you get about 25% higher purchase price when you sell with an investment banker. You have a much higher likelihood that you actually will complete the process and close. And most importantly, you're going to have a strong amount of peace of mind throughout the sales process, because this is somebody who does it on a daily basis, and can help guide you through the process. I think it's really important as well to note, going back to one of my prior statements, that managing yourself is half the battle. And so having somebody that's objective, that doesn't have emotions one way or the other with the transaction, is one of the things that it improves the likelihood that it's going to go well. It's just the same as why a lawyer doesn't represent themselves in court, or a doctor doesn't operate on themselves or their children. Um, that emotional influence of stress and uncertainty and all those different things, that specifically mid-market business owners have relative to, for example, somebody that runs a big public company, and essentially is doesn't have that same emotional attachment, is a huge reason why a third party advisor can get them a superior outcome.
Mr. David, what are some common, often overlooked operational or financial issues within a mid market business that can silently derail a deal or significantly devalue the company? And how can owners identify and fix them early?
Yeah, a great question. So, in the book, I lay out what are called existential threats. And, ultimately, it's important to give a little bit of context, which is, no buyer wants to write a big check. And then, a few days later, something happened, even if it is highly unlikely to happen, but something catastrophic happens, and they essentially lose their investment, shortly thereafter. Because of that, when you have an existential threat within your business or risk within your business, it's really important to focus upon that. What do I mean by an existential threat? I mean things such as really high customer concentration. So if half of your business is dependent upon a single customer, it is really hard to sell the business, because most buyers would say, well, I think everything will be fine, but it's possible that this big customer will leave once you sell the business, and then I've got nothing left. So that's one example of an existential risk that could really not just significantly reduce the value of the business, but could make it unsellable, because about 50% of businesses are unsellable. Other examples, if you have major regulatory investigations or lawsuits that are against you, it's very difficult for an outsider to really understand what's the true situation and what's the likelihood of it being successfully resolved. And so, what do people do when there's uncertainty? They essentially pass, or they delay. They say, you know what, come back when this has been, resolved. And the last example that I'll give is essentially what is called key person risk. So it's not uncommon, particularly in smaller mid-market businesses, that the entire business really depends upon that one individual. If they were to go and disappear on vacation for 2 or 3 weeks, the business essentially would fall apart. And so that is also a really extremely important factor, to buyers, to making sure that there's that infrastructure, that to the extent you decided to go off and retire, that the business still would be stable and in good hands, during the transition. All of these things are addressable, but they just need to be addressed with the luxury of time and preparation ahead of time.
As a founder, advisor, investor, as an author, what are your short term and long term goals, Mr. David?
Great question. For me, I've been very lucky, as an investor and advisor, to have done very well. And so, for me, the what success looks like is, being able to be highly selective with who I work with as clients. In terms of, for me, my North Star personally is I want to work on stuff that I learn with people I admire. So it's highly important for me to work with clients that have similar values. engagements that are interesting and that I can learn from. And then also there are just fundamental technical elements within a prospective client that are relevant, such as their reasonableness of expectations, their emotional readiness to sell, et cetera. Because in my business, we are compensated overwhelmingly based upon success. So it's very important that we essentially partner with a business owner and company that's well prepared to not only go to market but to successfully sell the business.
Good luck to your goals, Mr. David, and looking forward for more success. And what will be your piece of advice for those people want to be like you?
I mean, so if somebody wanted to go, into investment banking, I think it's really important that they start with a strong foundational understanding of, um, basic corporate accounting and finance. It's something which I think is the cornerstone of every transaction, and so having that baseline, I think, is really important. Everything else, quite frankly, after that, Daniel, I think is more around somebody's mindset and attitude. The reality is there is no one size fit all answer for all transactions. And it really requires somebody who is, creative yet relentless in coming up with different routes to try to not only find relevant buyers, but to negotiate a deal that both sides, both the seller, their client, and the buyer can agree upon. So I would advise them to also work on a lot of the soft skills, which are really around things like tenacity, ownership, et cetera, that are highly important in terms of being a successful investment banker.
Definitely. And thank you for your advice, Mr. David. And can you recommend a book that influenced your journey?
Sure, absolutely. For me, one of the most impactful books that I've read has been Principles by Ray Dalio. And to me, it was super insightful in that, in such a structured way, he took basically a lot of his life and work lessons, and provided us a very candid glimpse in terms of his life and mentality, which is very rare for somebody of that stature. So it's something which I highly recommend to people, professionally, of all walks of life.
Thank you for your recommendation, Mr. David. And beyond the headline price, why is it understanding deal structure like cash versus stock or in-outs versus seller financing absolutely critical for mid-market sellers? And what the common pitfalls does the book highlight?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of people focus on the headline number that buyers want to showcase to you, and they want to frame it in a way that makes them look as good as possible. But the reality is that, unlike when you sell your house and you receive all the money up front and you hand them the keys and you never see them again, when you sell your business, you generally are not going to receive all the money up front. You're going to have a number of those other elements, which are basically different forms of payment that get paid out over time and have different levels of risk. And so, therefore, not all offers are created equally. In fact, there's many times that we've encountered where we've actually encouraged a client to go with a quote unquote lower offer. Um, the reality, though, is that some of those elements within it, are less likely to occur, and actually, the one that looks like a lower offer could actually be, far better. There are other elements that are really important as well when considering different offers, which is the certainty or the likelihood that the buyer is actually going to be able to successfully close on the terms that they've provided. Because it's very easy to put on a sheet of paper that I'm going to buy your company and I'm going to pay a lot of money for it. But the real question is, are they successfully going to honor those terms, and do they have the money to actually pay those terms when it comes time to close? So all of those factors, both the quantitative elements of different types of consideration, as well as the likelihood of closing, are really important to take a look at. Thankfully, when you talk about the different forms of consideration, what you can attempt to try to do is to try to put those different elements and estimate what they are on a cash equivalent basis. So obviously, if you get a dollar today, it's worth a dollar. But if they're offering you a loan that's going to pay out in 3 years, you need to ask, well, what's the interest rate and what's the risk level relative to other factors that may be putting in, and therefore you may say that that dollar is not worth a dollar, but 80 cents or 85 cents. And so by putting it on a cash equivalent basis, you can compare offers across different buyers and more confidently determine which one is the best one on a quantitative basis. That to me, though, is separate from the other question, which is which buyer is most likely going to honor those terms and can successfully close, and perhaps just as importantly is which one is the best fit for you. This is your baby that you've worked your entire life to build and to grow, and you want to make sure that you find a partner who you can trust and see eye to eye with, post closing. Daniel, I've lost the sound on your end.
Okay. Oh, my apologies for the glitch, people. So, Mr. David, how does the book help owners sorry for that, help owners set realistic expectation about timeline, complexity, and emotional roller coaster of the entire selling process?
So yeah, one of the ways it does it is we've intermixed at the beginning of every chapter a case study which explains, um, you know, in human terms, what that issue means in reality and how it can affect somebody. We also throughout the book interject what are common emotional or psychological reactions that entrepreneurs have had based upon our experience. And then, lastly, we present it all. So things like timeline, things about like likelihood of closing, all of those statistics and items are included, throughout the book, so they can be, very much proficient, based upon what real world practitioners are seeing and doing versus what they may have expected in their heads. What we found is most business owners dramatically underestimate the complexity of selling a business, the timeline of selling a business, and they often overestimate the actual value of their own personal business. And it makes sense. Everybody thinks their own baby is the prettiest, and so there tends to be that bias.
If you had to pinpoint one piece of advice or framework in the book that consistently gives a mid-market owners the most significant boost in confidence or outcome, what would it be?
Look, I think it's really around surrounding yourself with the right team. You know that you're going against very sophisticated counterparties. The only thing that's going to make you feel comfortable is that you have on your side equally competent experts that have your best interests at heart. That to me will give you the most confidence. The reality is, this is not what you do on a day-to-day basis. You're never going to learn the fundamentals of it with as much depth as your counterpart. But if you can feel confident that you selected the right advisor, that single decision will have one of the greatest impacts in terms of your level of success as well as your peace of mind.
Definitely. And Mr. David, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in its third season, and Movie 101 Review and Music 101 in fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. Mr. David, if or what if this or what is the single most important thing you want mid-market business owners to take away and act upon after reading Selling Your Business with Confidence?
So aside from making sure you get an advisor, which by the way, when as an investor sold businesses, I've used a third party advisor. I think the biggest takeaway is really preparation is really the highest return on investment activity that you can do. Um, the ability to spend time and proactively work on improving your business is going to give you a dramatic payoff, which is far greater than almost any other decision that you can make. And given how important the sale of the business is to most mid-market business owners, it really is a no-regret decision that has a huge payoff for it. So to me, that's one of the highest, um, one of the biggest takeaways that I really would impress upon a reader.
Mr. David Mccombie, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom today. So can you please invite our listeners to support your book, your advocacy, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Could you repeat that, Daniel?
Yeah, can you please invite our listeners to support your book, your advocacy, or whatever your projects that you're doing right now?
Yeah, so I would love anybody to check out Selling Your Business with Confidence. I'd love to hear any feedback you may have. Best way to get into contact with me would be through LinkedIn. David W. McCombie III is my name, and I'm founder and CEO of McCombie Group.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. David Mccombie III because if you support him, more and more and more empowering books to come, more and more empowering advocacy to come, and for sure, more and more empowering business to come. So, Mr. David, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great one.
More to come, people. See you soon.